Hello, dear listener. Wherever you are, in the hush of midnight, in the softness of morning, or in the golden slant of evening light, I welcome you into this story. However you join, let us drift across time into an age of heroes, gods, and songs so ancient that they were once carried only on the tongues of poets beside the fire. Our tale begins not in peace, but in the ashes of war. For 10 long years the Greeks encamped before the high gates of Troy. Spears flashed, shields rang, the plain was watered with blood. The names of warriors were carried like thunder through the camps. Achilles, blazing and doomed. Agamemnon, kingly yet proud. Ajax, vast as a tower. Among them, less radiant yet more cunning, moved Odysseus of Ithaca, a man not famed for overwhelming strength, but for the sharpness of his mind. It was Odysseus who, weary of endless battle, devised the stratagem of the horse. A hollow beast of timber, wheels beneath, its flanks wide enough to cradle warriors in silence. While the Trojans debated, it stood as if abandoned, a gift from a retreating foe. They dragged it within their walls, blind to the trap. And at night the Greeks poured out, fire in their hands, blades in their fists. Troy woke to ruin. Towers crumbled, screams filled the alleys, and the proud city fell. When the fires cooled, the Greeks longed for home. Some would never see it. Ajax the Lesser swallowed by Poseidon's storm, Agamemnon doomed to betrayal in his own hall. Yet each man set sail, hoping the winds would favor him. And among them, Odysseus, whose heart pulled fiercest toward home. Home was not only earth and stone. Home was Penelope, his wife, wise as she was beautiful, weaving by day and unraveling by night, holding suitors at bay with patience sharper than any blade. Home was Telemachus, the son he had left as a babe, now growing toward manhood without a father's hand to guide him. Home was the rough soil of Ithaca, where olive trees twisted in the wind, where goats leapt upon the cliffs, where hearth smoke curled into evening sky. These were the treasures Odysseus yearned for more than gold or glory. But the gods are fickle. Poseidon, lord of the deep, nursed a grudge. His son, Polyphemus the Cyclops, would one day be blinded by Odysseus's hand. Athena, bright-eyed goddess, favored the king of Ithaca, yet even she could not smooth the path entirely. Fate had carved a long wandering, and the sea would not release him easily. The ships left Troy with sails white as gulls, oars flashing like wings across the dark water. The men sang of hearth and wife, of children and fields, their voices carrying hope. Yet already shadows stirred. Storms blew them astray, waves hurled them from course, until at last they reached a shore strange and sweet. It was the land of the Lotus-Eaters. There the air hung heavy with perfume, blossoms golden and thick. The people were gentle, smiling, offering fruit of the lotus with hands soft as breeze. And whoever tasted forgot. Forgotten were wives and sons. Forgotten were fields and hearths. Forgotten even was the very name of home. Men sat with eyes glazed, lips curved in dreamy joy, their oars abandoned, their duty dissolved into sweetness. Odysseus, seeing his men bewitched, felt rage and sorrow twist inside him. He would not allow Ithaca to be lost to flowers. He seized them, dragged them weeping, tied them fast beneath the benches of the ships. Their cries echoed as the sails lifted, the island slipping behind like a dream half remembered. Thus he learned, not every peril came with blade and roar. Some came softly, with petals and smiles, and these could be the deadliest of all. Beyond the Lotus Isle lay harsher fates. They came to a land wild and rugged, where giants called Cyclopes roamed. These were not cities of men, with laws and councils, but caves and cliffs, each giant tending his flocks alone, caring nothing for neighbor or stranger. They sowed no grain, built no ships, brewed no wine. Their strength was law, their will unchecked. Odysseus, ever curious, led a company inland. They found a cavern vast, its mouth wide, its floor strewn with baskets of cheese, pails of milk, pens of sheep. His men begged him, "Take what we need, Captain, and go before danger wakes." But Odysseus lingered. He longed to meet the master, perhaps to win a gift of hospitality. For among Greeks the bond between guest and host was sacred. Night fell. Heavy footsteps shook the ground. Polyphemus, son of Poseidon, loomed tall as a cliff, his single eye glaring in the firelight. He rolled a boulder across the cave's mouth, a stone so vast no 20 men could move it. When he spied the strangers, his voice boomed like thunder against rock. Odysseus spoke of their voyage, of customs that bound men together. But Polyphemus laughed, for he cared nothing for Zeus nor the laws of men. With monstrous hands he seized 2 men, dashed them upon the stones, devoured them raw. Their screams echoed, the cavern stinking of blood. Fear gripped the Greeks, yet Odysseus's mind raced. To slay the Cyclops outright was folly. The boulder barred escape. So he endured, though each day Polyphemus feasted on more of his men. By night, the monster slept, his snores shaking the cave, his breath reeking of wine and flesh. At last Odysseus acted. He carved a stake from olive wood, long and thick, sharpened it to a point, hid it among dung and baskets. He offered Polyphemus wine, red and potent, until the giant's eye grew heavy. Before sleep claimed him, Polyphemus asked his name. With cunning, Odysseus answered, "Nobody." When the monster fell into drunken slumber, Odysseus and his men seized the stake, heated it in the embers, and drove it into the single eye. Polyphemus awoke with a roar, blood gushing like black rain. He bellowed for his kin, who gathered at the cave mouth. "Who harms you, brother?" they cried. "Nobody blinds me," he roared. So they turned away, thinking him cursed by gods. At dawn, Odysseus lashed his men beneath the bellies of the sheep. When Polyphemus rolled the stone aside, he felt along the backs, but never beneath. Thus the men slipped free, Odysseus clinging to the great ram. They boarded, rowed hard for open sea, yet pride undid him. From the safety of distance he shouted his true name, taunting the blinded giant. Polyphemus raised his hands to the sky, praying to Poseidon, "Father, hear me. Grant that Odysseus of Ithaca may never see his home. Or if fate ordains he must, let it be late, alone, in grief, to find strangers in his hall." Poseidon heard, and the curse fell upon the waves. The sea darkened, wind screamed, waves rose high. The men bent to the oars, pale with terror. And from that moment, every gust bore the wrath of a god. Yet Odysseus, though burdened with despair, clung to stubborn fire. He would endure, he would not yield, until Ithaca lay once more beneath his feet. The waves still boiled with the anger of a god. The sea that had once gleamed blue now heaved black and green, each swell a hand raised to strike. Odysseus gripped the helm, the wood slick with spray, his knuckles white as bone. The cries of his men mingled with the roar of the storm, each voice pleading for mercy. Yet mercy was far from Poseidon's heart. Through the tumult they steered, sails torn to rags, oars snapping like twigs. Salt stung their eyes, the wind howled in their ears. Lightning split the horizon, revealing faces pale with terror, then swallowed them once more in darkness. And yet, amid ruin, Odysseus's voice cut through, firm, commanding, a tether to sanity. "Row!" he shouted. "Do not yield, for the sea takes only those who surrender." At last the storm relented, though the sea still swelled with restless fury. The men slumped upon benches, their bodies bruised, their spirits hollow. Grief pressed heavy, for many had been lost already to the Cyclops, and the memory of their screams lingered. Yet grief was a luxury. Hunger and thirst pressed harder, demanding strength from weary limbs. They drifted to an island whose shores were jagged as teeth, its cliffs crowned with mist. Birds wheeled overhead, their cries sharp as knives. Here they found brief respite. Springs of fresh water, groves of wild olives, goats leaping across rocks. They feasted, filled their skins, and kindled a fire against the night. The stars stretched above them, cold and brilliant, a reminder of gods who watched but did not always care. Around the fire, silence clung heavier than smoke. Each man turned thoughts inward, to wife, to child, to fields left untended. Some wept softly, others clenched jaws against sorrow. Odysseus sat apart, eyes fixed upon the horizon. His mind did not rest, even when his body begged for sleep. Already he feared the curse of Polyphemus would shadow every wave ahead. And indeed, the journey grew harsher. They came upon strange shores where the people spoke tongues twisted like the cry of gulls, where fruits glittered with poison beneath their skins, where the air itself seemed heavy with malice. They tarried nowhere long, for danger revealed itself swiftly in each place. Always they pressed onward, hearts weary but unwilling to stop, as if rest itself would be surrender. It was then that Odysseus began to speak more often to the gods, not in boast, as once at Troy, but in prayer laced with humility. Upon the deck, beneath stars wheeling eternal, he raised hands calloused by rope and sword. "Zeus, father of gods, if I am truly marked by fate, grant me strength to endure. If I must wander, let me wander not in vain. Let me see the hearth of Ithaca, if only once more before I die." His men, hearing, took courage, though none knew if the sky listened. The sea answered with trials. They found themselves pursued by winds that shifted without reason, blowing them in circles, east when they sought west, north when they sought south. Days bled into nights, until time itself seemed lost. They marked it not by sun or star, but by the dwindling of provisions, the deepening of shadows beneath their eyes. Yet in those darkest hours, Odysseus bound them together. He walked among them, spoke of Ithaca as if it lay just beyond the horizon. He painted pictures with words: Penelope's loom, Telemachus's boyhood laughter, and the olives twisting in rocky soil. "We will see it again," he promised. "Hold fast, for the sea is wide but not endless." Some believed. Others only rowed because to row was to live another hour. Yet the promise lingered, a fragile flame against the wind. It was in this state, worn but unbroken, that they glimpsed the outlines of another island, its shores gleaming pale in dawn light. The air carried scents of herbs, wild and sharp. The men's hearts lifted, for even the unknown seemed mercy compared to endless waves. They steered toward it, their voices rising once more in cautious song, though beneath each note trembled fear of what new trial awaited. Odysseus, standing at the prow, narrowed his eyes against the spray. The memory of Polyphemus still burned. He knew well that beauty could cloak peril, that sweetness could hide snares. Yet he also knew that to reach home they must face whatever lay before them, for the sea offers no path but forward. The dawn unrolled like a scroll of pale fire, and the island ahead grew from a smudge into cliffs and combed forests, a dark green mane shaken by the wind. The men eased their stroke, oars feathering the water with the delicacy of birds landing on a lake. Above, gulls traced white signatures across the sky. Below, the sea brightened to the color of hammered silver. Odysseus let the ship drift a moment, listening. A shoreline speaks if you let it. The hiss of hidden reefs, the mutter of caves, the throb of surf in stone chambers, where the tide keeps time like a sleeping giant's breath. They beached the vessel on a tongue of shingle, lifted her just beyond the reach of the wash, and set a small fire with driftwood that snapped and hissed as salt bled from it. Breakfast was simple. The last of the barley bread, dried figs softened in seawater, a pitcher of collected dew tipped into their skins. It tasted like a promise postponed. "Captain," said Eurylochus, watching cloud shadows tumble across the slope, "what if the island is empty?" Odysseus measured the tree line, the neat cut where brush gave way to a path. No goat makes such a corridor. "Empty places don't cut their own paths," he said. "We go careful. We go with respect." They climbed in a file, the path mats of thyme and crushed rosemary sending up a scent like a memory of summer in a land that had never known winter. The air held the faint ring of metal on metal, distant, regular, a rhythm not of war but of work. More telling still was the wind's report, a warm current down from the hill, sweet with smoke that had choices in it. Olive, oak, a note of resin. Where there is chosen fire, there are hands. Where there are hands, there are laws, good or ill. Halfway up, a spring spilled from a lip of stone into a trough, and beside it lay 3 cups of clay, set with their mouths down to keep dust from their rims. Hospitality can be a trap, Odysseus thought. And sometimes a trap can be hospitality, if you're lost enough to need it. He turned each cup, rinsed it, filled it, and, from an old sailor's superstition, poured a swallow to the ground first, for the god beneath the earth who catches what the living cannot keep. Birdsong thinned as they neared the crest. The forest opened into a meadow trimmed as if by giant shears, grass cropped to the length of a finger. At its far edge sat a house built not for defense, but for ease. Broad veranda, pillars whittled smooth by care, a doorway wide enough to invite the world. Smoke braided from a roof vent into sky. 2 dogs slept in the doorway, the kind that look once and remember your soul. They lifted their heads and thumped their tails as if greeting cousins who had been slow to arrive. Odysseus's men faltered, remembering other doors and other welcomes that had not been welcome at all. Their bodies remembered the Cyclops' cave the way skin remembers old wounds in rain. "Hold," said Odysseus, and the word carried the weight of rope around a mast in a storm. He moved first, palms bare, shoulders square, not humble exactly but honest. The posture that says, "I come to ask, not to take." A woman stood within, backlit by fire, her hair a spill of dusk down her shoulder, her hands busy with a wooden ladle that traced circles in a bronze pot. She looked up, as if she had been expecting this party for a week and was pleased to see they weren't late. "Strangers," she said, and the word in her mouth didn't mean threat. It meant possibility. "You smell of the miles. Lay down your packs and let your heart sit. Water in the basin, benches by the hearth, food here. If you like the sea's salt still on your tongues, I won't sweeten the stew too far." They looked to their captain. Odysseus nodded, the smallest of nods, but from him it was a signed scroll. Men filed in, the close murmur of their thanks folding into the house's soft sounds. The dogs flopped back to sleep. From a side room came the steady clack of a loom, the heartbeat of every home in lands where thread is winter's gold. The warp lifted, the weft slid. The beater kissed the cloth with a sound that any man who dreams of a wife knows in his bones. Bread unfurled its perfume as it cracked. The stew, lamb laced with bitter greens, a whisper of citrus peel, sat heavy in bowls that had been warmed on the stones by the fire's skirt. Wine wore a bloom that spoke of clay amphorae, cool cellars, and patience. Hunger has a grammar. The first taste is always an apology, the second a vow, the third a benediction. Shoulders loosened, eyes softened. Sailors who had slept like clenched fists for months uncurled a little. "Your name?" the woman asked Odysseus. "Call me a man who owes many names debts," he said, smiling the way you do when truth and safety meet at a crossroads. "And you?" "Some call me Circe," she said, not making it a boast or a threat, merely a fact the way a mountain is a fact. If the name bruised the air, the house didn't show it. The loom's rhythm never faltered. The dogs twitched in sleep, running in rabbit dreams. Eurylachus's spoon paused, lifted. The men looked from their captain to their bowls to the doorway and back again, like sailors taking bearings by 3 different stars and hoping they would agree. Circe's eyes were clever, not cruel. She saw the history of storms in their hands, the small tremble at the edge of exhaustion that men try to disguise with noise. "Eat," she said, "and then you may tell me why the sea keeps returning you to gates where you'd think you swore never to knock again." They ate. And because the road back to trust is paved with ordinary acts done well, Circe brought a basin and poured water over each man's fingers, the stream breaking on salt and tar and old blood until it ran clean. Odysseus watched her, measuring the gentle economy of her movements. Power doesn't always announce itself with thunder. Sometimes it is the steadiness that does not need to prove anything. When the bowls shone empty and the last crust surrendered, Circe set aside the ladle and looked at them as a physician looks at a fever, not unkindly. "Now," she said, with the quiet that always follows a meal, "tell me what you have lost, and I will tell you what you still carry." A murmur rippled. Men glanced at Odysseus again. He weighed his answer. He could stack his triumphs like shields in a rack, let them flash, or he could show his failures and trust that the soft of them wouldn't be used as knives. He chose a third road, the one he'd learned after Troy. Speak as if the gods are listening for sense, not for praise. "We lost the names of 3 men in a cave," he said. "We have their faces, but not their tomorrows. We lost the way the wind was supposed to blow. We have a promise we can't eat and a home we can't hold. We have fear, of flowers, of meat, of beds whose welcome we can't be sure of. We have the sea, we have this ship." He let a breath out slow. "And we have each other, thinner than we began, but stitched tighter." Circe considered this. "Some men bring only appetite," she said. "You bring appetite and attention. That can feed you longer." She rose, crossed to a shelf where jars ranked like soldiers, clay bellies stamped with moons and serpents and vines. From one she pinched a dust finer than flour and flicked it into the hearth. The flame ran blue along its edges, then settled again. For the sleep that follows honest hunger, she said, not to bind you, to loosen what shouldn't be knotted any longer. That night, the house held them like a palm holds a bird that consents to rest. Men breathed without dragging air. Shoulders forgot for a few hours that they had been holding the sky up. Odysseus lay awake longer, listening to the loom's faint whisper in the next room, the sound of a world making more of itself. He thought of Penelope's loom, the shuttles back and forth like the seas. He pictured Telemachus's hands. Were they big now? Did they move in his father's shapes or make their own grammar? The stars were not the same stars as in Ithaca. Every sky is particular. But the constellations still told old stories, and old stories are a kind of road. Sometime toward dawn, a dream grazed him. A harbor seen through a veil of rain, a boy standing on the breakwater, hand raised. Penelope turning down the lamp with a gesture that could extinguish pity as easily as flame. He woke with the aftertaste of cedar on his tongue, and a word he did not remember speaking hovering in the air like a single gull over a flat sea. Almost. Morning did not knock so much as enter politely. Light pooled on the threshold and spread across the floorboards in a slow, practiced way, as if it had done so every day for 100 years and would continue for 100 more. Circe had already been to the springs. Her hair was braided tight for work. She set bowls of goat's milk and barley porridge steaming with a stripe of honey, darker than molasses. The men ate with the paradox of sailors, greedily but grateful. Your ship, Circe said to Odysseus, could use the sort of mending that doesn't complain when it's done. It could, he admitted. And my men could use a day when the oars don't ask anything of their backs. Then take this day, she said. I don't bargain with hungry men. No one gets a fair price. They worked. That is to say, they remembered themselves. A ship is a body that survives by attention. They tightened stays, combed pitch into seams with their thumbs until the hull stopped whispering that private leak speech ships use when they fear they'll be ignored. They stitched a rent in the sail with thread Circe provided from a chest brimming with twines and cords the color of dusk. The loom's clack became the rhythm for their hammering, their hauling, their singing, low work songs about weather and women, and the sorts of foolish promises men make to tides. At noon, Circe walked down to the beach with a basket on her hip and a jar under her arm. From the basket came loaves and smoked fish bound in vine leaves. From the jar, a drink that tasted first of bitterness, then like wild thyme, then like second chances. Don't drink much, she warned, smiling. It is not a river to drown in. It is a cup to remind the tongue how many flavors the world keeps, even when you think it has offered only two: salt and fear. Eurylochus, who trusted slowly, watched her as one might watch a cliff for signs of falling. We have seen hospitality turn its face, he said. Then you have lived, Circe replied. Hospitality is a mirror. It shows you more about the guest than the host. She broke a loaf and offered him the heel. Eat, sailor. Suspicion is not a meal. By evening, the ship sat on the shingle like a dog, brushed and fed, content to be a ship again. The men laughed without flinching at their own laughter. Circe stood with Odysseus where the tide crept in to polish their toes with cool, glassy tongues. You have the face of a man trying to remember the exact shape of a crossroads he passed in the dark, she said. I am thinking about the cost of every choice, Odysseus answered. That one day in a cave, I chose not to be silent. And now the sea keeps sending me a bill I can't finish paying. Circe's gaze drifted to the horizon, where the line between water and sky is an oath no one can swear on. We always pay. The only mercy, she said, is when the receipt includes the name of who you became along the way. They were quiet a time, listening to the little bones of shells clatter as the backwash sifted them. Then Circe said so gently, it felt like setting down a full cup on a steady table. If you are to find the shore you want, you must pass through a place no beating heart seeks. The hall where breaths end and names live on. You will pour for the dead, and the dead will pour into you. Take what you can hold and leave. Don't make a home in the underworld, Odysseus. Even grief has tides he did not start. Men who have sailed long learn not to jerk when truth walks out of the surf. Tell me how to do this without losing my men, he said. Do not promise them safety, Circe replied. Promise them attention. Safety is a coin that gods counterfeit. Attention is a net you can mend yourself, Tsar, that night. Because at the end of every day, there is a night, and at the end of every comfort, there is a leaving. Odysseus told his men what tomorrow would ask of them. A voyage to the edge of the world. A trench dug in a land where the sun is stingy. Libations for the thirsty dead. Questions asked of a blind prophet whose answers will bruise. Some men shivered. Some set their jaws. One whispered a prayer in a language older than Homer's meter. They were all, in their different ways, brave. Before sleep, Circe laid out bundles for them. Barley meal, a wineskin marked with a sigil of the moon, knotted cords that would hold even when soaked with sea. To Odysseus, she gave a sprig of something with a root, dark as midnight, and a flower white as milk. For remembering yourself when other voices press too close, she said. It is not magic. It's practice, grown into a plant. The house exhaled its warmth as the fire settled into a red smile. The dogs turned in a circle and collapsed like punctuation at the end of a well-made sentence. The loom fell silent. Cloth finished. Story written in thread. Odysseus closed his eyes to the small noises of a place that had accepted them without surrendering its soul. He dreamed of a shoreline again, but closer now. Of a harbor that held a shape like a hand cupped to keep a candle from the wind. Of a woman who did not wave because she did not need to. Of a boy who stood in a doorway, as if the doorway were a question he was ready to answer. He woke with the certainty that the road had not shortened, but that he had grown more patient legs. At first light, they shouldered the bundles, lifted the ship like a prayer lifted by many voices, and let the tide take them. Circe stood on the strand, the hem of her dress freckled with foam. She did not raise her hand in farewell. She simply met Odysseus's eyes with a look that said, "You have been fed, and now you must feed yourself." The sea opened its long, complicated mouth. They went in. Behind them, the island dwindled until it was only a darker thought in the bright morning. Ahead lay water the color of uncut sapphire, and beyond that, a rim of mist that was not weather, but boundary. The men took the oars with the calm of those who understand the cost and have decided to pay it. Odysseus set the prow toward the place where stories say the world's edge is not a cliff, but a turning. He spoke then, not loudly, not as a captain who must hammer courage into brittle hearts, but as a man who knows the difference between fear and the attention fear asks for. Listen. Whatever comes, voices that promise you will finally be understood, mouths with too many teeth, winds that say turn back. Remember, we are going forward. We do not bargain with currents. We ride them and step off where the ground is true. The oars took up a rhythm. The ship answered with a creak that was less complaint than agreement. The sun climbed, the sea shouldered them, and somewhere just ahead, invisible but as real as hunger, the threshold waited, the thin place where the living lean over and the dead lean up. And for a little while, both speak the same language. And Odysseus, whose true weapon had always been attention, leaned in. He did not ask the sea for mercy. He asked it for a fair hearing. Then he gave it his back, his breath, his will, and the ship slid on, a dark stitch sowing water to horizon, mending the torn distance between a man and his home. The prow cut steadily through water that grew darker with every mile, as if the sea itself were warning them of what lay ahead. It was not merely night that deepened. It was a heaviness, a hush, as though the world's heart beat more slowly here. The air smelled different, not of salt and kelp alone, but of iron, damp earth, and the faint, bitter tang that clings to the edges of dreams one wakes sweating from. The men rowed in silence, and their silence was more telling than any prayer. Oars rose and fell with the precision of ritual, each stroke a statement. We will go, though no man wishes it. Their faces gleamed pale in the dim light, jaws set. Even the sea itself seemed to pull reluctantly, its usual chatter of waves subdued into a steady undertow. Odysseus stood near the prow, eyes narrowed against the mist. His mind did not wander. It sharpened. He thought of Circe's words. Do not make a home in the underworld. He had seen men make homes in grief, in anger, in temptation. He had seen how those homes became prisons. He would not let this place, this crossing, trap him with the illusion that sorrow is all there is. At last they reached a shore unlike any other, barren, treeless, a strip of black soil between sea and mist. No birds wheeled overhead, no insects sang. The very air seemed to resist being breathed, thin and cold like water at great depth. The men disembarked slowly, boots sinking into earth that yielded too easily, as though it remembered every footstep that had pressed it before and resented each new one. They carried the sheep Circe had given them, black-fleeced and restless, as if the animals knew their role too well. Odysseus led them inland to where the ground dipped into a hollow. There he drew his sword and carved a trench in the earth, deep enough to hold both wine and blood. The soil swallowed each cut with a sigh. He poured libations as Circe had taught, honey sweet and golden, wine dark and potent, water to seal the offerings, barley sprinkled last like dust of memory. Then, with steady hand, he slit the throats of the sheep. Their blood ran black in the dim light, pooling in the trench, steam rising faintly as if the earth itself drank greedily. And then the air changed. From the mist they came, shadows of men and women, the countless dead, drawn to the smell of sacrifice. Their forms were insubstantial, wavering, yet their hunger was palpable. They pressed forward, eyes hollow, voices whispering fragments of names, pleas, half-remembered songs. The men of Ithaca recoiled, gripping their swords, but Odysseus raised his hand. Hold. They cannot touch you unless you let them. They crave only the blood, the chance to taste voice again. The shades swirled around the trench, a desperate chorus. Among them, Odysseus glimpsed faces. Friends fallen at Troy, comrades lost at sea, even children and maidens whose stories had ended too soon. His heart clenched, but he held firm. He knew the prophet Tiresias must come, and until then, none could drink. The press of spirits was suffocating, their voices a tide of grief. And yet, amid the throng, a shape more familiar than any. His mother, Anticlea. Her eyes, once warm, now glimmered faintly, her hands reaching. Odysseus's chest burned with longing to embrace her, but he forced himself to stand still. Circe had warned, only the prophet first. And then Tiresias came. Blind even in death, yet more seeing than any living man, he moved through the crowd as a mast cuts waves, calm and inevitable. He bent to the trench, drank of the blood, and when he raised his head, his voice carried both thunder and lament. Odysseus, son of Laertes, man of twists and turns, why have you come where only shadows dwell? You seek your home, but your path is thrashed with thorns. Poseidon will hound you still, for the blinding of his child cannot be forgotten. Yet you may endure if wisdom guides you. When you come to the Isle of the Sun, touch not the cattle of Helios. If your men, blinded by hunger, commit that sin, ruin will fall. Only you may survive, and even so, you will crawl home broken, to find men devouring your wealth and pressing your wife. Yet take courage, for you shall set them right, and your house shall stand again, though not without blood. The words struck like stones dropped into a well, echoing deeper than hearing. Odysseus bowed his head. He had asked for truth, and truth was rarely kind. Still, it was a map, and a map, however cruel, is better than blindness. Only then did he allow his mother to drink. Her form brightened, her voice trembled like a reed in wind. "My son," she said, "still you wander, while Penelope weeps and waits. Telemachus grows, but without a father's hand. I could not bear the long years of waiting. Grief hollowed me, and I slipped into death, longing always for you." Odysseus fell to his knees, tears cutting his face. "Mother, could I not have held you one last time, given you comfort?" But she shook her head softly. "The living and the dead are divided by more than miles. No embrace can bridge it, yet know this. Love binds even across the veil. Go, son, return. Do not let sorrow anchor you here." He reached, but his arms closed on air. Her form dissolved back into mist, leaving only the echo of her voice in his heart. Other shades came. Agamemnon telling bitterly of betrayal by his wife and her lover. Achilles, the greatest of warriors, who confessed he would rather be a servant alive than king among the dead. Their words were lessons. That glory fades, that home matters more than renown, that even kings envy the humblest breath of the living. The men trembled, the press of spirits growing unbearable. Odysseus sheathed his sword, his voice raw. "Enough. We have heard what we needed." Back to the ship they staggered from the hollow, leaving the trench behind, the voices of the dead fading into the endless mist. On the beach, the sea looked almost merciful again, its gray surface promising escape. Yet Odysseus knew. He carried the weight of those voices now, a burden heavier than any storm. Still, he lifted the sail. For what else can a man do when the only road home runs through the heart of sorrow? The sea, once more beneath them, sighed and swelled, as if resentful of having surrendered them back from the mouth of death. Odysseus's men bent to their oars with the silence of those who have seen shadows too close. Each stroke an act of defiance against despair. Their eyes were hollow, yet their hands steady. Grief had carved them into something leaner, something less easily broken. For 9 days and nights the ship wandered until cliffs rose pale against the horizon. There on the Isle of Aeolia dwelt Aeolus, keeper of the winds, a lord whose palace gleamed with bronze gates and walls that shimmered like sunlit waves. The air itself seemed gentled by his hand. Storms hushed at his command. Gales curled obediently like hounds at his heel. Odysseus and his weary band were welcomed as guests. The halls rang with laughter and music. Tables groaned under platters of roasted meats and bowls heaped with fruit, pitchers spilling wine fragrant with spices. For a moment, Ithaca felt near, as though hidden only behind the next door of this palace. Aeolus, generous, listened to their tale. He marveled at Odysseus's cunning and pitied his long wandering. From a leather bag tied with silver cord, he drew forth the captive winds, all save the gentle west wind, which he loosed to guide them home. "Guard this well," he said, pressing the bag into Odysseus's hands. "Here lies every gale and storm chained. As long as it remains closed, your course is sure, your sails steady." Odysseus thanked him with a heart blazing with hope. At last, the gods had shown mercy. For 9 days they sailed without hindrance, the west wind carrying them swift and sure. Ithaca rose faint upon the horizon, the outline of cliffs and hills that Odysseus knew as one knows the lines of a beloved's face. His heart surged, his hands trembled with eagerness. But fate is cruel, and men are often their own undoing. While Odysseus slept, spent from nights of wakefulness, his men whispered. Their eyes fell again and again upon the bag. What treasure lay within? Gold from Troy, jewels stolen from gods, ransom enough to buy estates for generations. Jealousy festered, greed gnawed. Why should he alone hoard such wealth? They murmured. At last they loosed the cord. With a shriek the winds burst forth, roaring, howling, tearing the sails, snapping the mast. The sea raged, waves rose like mountains. The ship was hurled backward as though flung by a giant's hand. Ithaca vanished once more, swallowed by distance. Odysseus awoke to ruin. His heart howled louder than the gales, but his face was stone. He seized the helm, fought to keep them afloat, but despair coiled tight around his chest. Never had home been so near, and never had it fled so swiftly. When at last they limped again to Aeolia, Odysseus went humbly to Aeolus's hall, bearing the bag now empty, his men bedraggled. "Lord, mercy once more," he pleaded. "We were foolish, but grant us another chance." Aeolus's face darkened. "Surely you are cursed of the gods," he said. "To aid you further would be to defy their will. Leave my island, Odysseus, and take with you your misfortune. No guest gift for you this time, only banishment." So they left, hearts heavy, the sea once again their judge. The sea bore them onward, unwilling yet inevitable. Its swells heavy with the memory of storms. For days they drifted, salt-crusted and hollow-eyed, until land rose once more, a coastline jagged and pale, cliffs bristling like the teeth of some vast beast. The men whispered among themselves. Perhaps here lay refuge, perhaps a chance to mend, to find bread and fire and the comfort of voices not their own. As they neared, they saw a harbor shaped like a giant's hand, cliffs curling inward to form a bowl of still water. The entrance was narrow, guarded by towers of stone. Within, the sea lay calm as glass, inviting. "Safe harbor," one man breathed, and the words were balm to weary hearts. Odysseus, cautious, held back with his own ship at the mouth, anchoring just outside. He had learned too much of false welcomes. But the other captains, desperate for respite, guided their ships into the enclosed bay, letting them rest side by side along the quiet shore. Their voices lifted in laughter for the first time in many days. Odysseus chose scouts and sent them inland to seek the people of this land. They walked up the steep path, cliffs looming until they came to a great well at the center of a village. There a maiden stood, tall and strong, drawing water in a jar of bronze. Her arms were corded with muscle, her eyes sharp as flint. She looked upon the strangers without fear, only curiosity, and told them her father, Antiphates, was king and would surely grant them welcome. So they followed her to a great house upon the height, its doorway vast enough for giants, its shadows deep. But when the king appeared, their hope withered. Antiphates towered above them, his teeth gleaming, his eyes bright with hunger, not of hospitality, but of flesh. With a roar, he seized one of the scouts, as a child seizes a bird, dashed him against the stone, and tore him apart. The others fled in terror, but already the queen, herself as monstrous as her mate, bellowed for the people. From every doorway giants poured, their shouts echoing like thunder, their hands lifting boulders large as hills. The scouts ran, stumbling down the path, as stones rained upon the ships in the harbor. The sea that had lain so calm now became a trap. The narrow entrance, once shelter, now prison. The Laestrygonians hurled boulders into the bay. Ships splintered, masts cracked, men were crushed as easily as reeds. Spears flew, impaling sailors where they stood. The quiet harbor churned red with blood and wreckage. Odysseus, watching from beyond the mouth, felt horror carve his heart, but his hand was steady. "Cut the ropes," he shouted. His men obeyed, hacking at the lines, pushing hard at the oars. Their ship leapt forward, oars biting water, as behind them the harbor became a grave. The screams of comrades filled the air, then were drowned by the sea itself. When at last they reached open water, only Odysseus's ship remained. From 12 proud vessels, one survived, carrying men whose faces were masks of grief. They rowed in silence, their hearts shattered, their eyes fixed upon the horizon as if afraid to look back. Odysseus's own spirit groaned within him. How many times had hope blossomed, only to wither into ash? How many faces had he seen vanish, one by one, into the maw of fate? Yet he forced himself upright, his voice calm though his soul bled. "We live," he told them. "And while we live, we go on. The sea is not yet finished with us, but neither have we finished with the sea." The sea stretched empty around them, wide as despair, silent but for the creak of wood and the weary slap of oars. Where once 12 ships had carried laughter, argument, and song, now only one remained, and the silence it bore was heavier than the sea itself. The men sat bent, eyes hollow, their grief so deep, it seemed to pull even the horizon closer. Odysseus stood at the prow, his cloak stiff with salt, his face drawn but unbowed. Within him grief screamed, but he would not let it be heard. For the men needed a figure who did not break, even if it meant the breaking happened in secret. He thought of each face lost, each name carried off by the Laestrygonian stones. The memory would not fade, nor did he wish it to. For to forget was another kind of death. It was in this shadow that the prow lifted once more toward a familiar shore. Aiaia, the isle of Circe. The smoke of her hearth rose against the sky, steady as a heartbeat. The men trembled, for their last memory of this place was fear and enchantment. Their bodies turned to swine, their minds caged. Yet Odysseus lifted his hand. She is no enemy now. Her house will hold us. And gods know, we are men who need holding. When they came ashore, Circe herself appeared, robes flowing like water, eyes that seemed to see not only faces, but the sorrow beneath. She looked upon their diminished number, and her lips parted in grief. So few, she whispered. The sea and its keepers are greedy indeed. She led them to her halls once more, where fires blazed, food steamed, and wine glowed in jars. The men, hollow with loss, ate without joy, but even the act of eating was a balm. Circe moved among them with a gentleness like dawn, pouring wine, speaking little, letting her presence itself be comfort. When the meal was done and silence hung heavy, she turned to Odysseus. Your road bends yet darker. I see the shadow of the sea narrowing into a place where choice is cruelty. You will face voices that sing sweet as honey, jaws that hunger in darkness, a whirlpool that swallows the world. Listen well, and perhaps you may pass. So she spoke of the Sirens, creatures whose song was woven with knowledge, whose voices could unspool the heart, drawing sailors to dash upon the rocks. Plug the ears of your men with wax, she counseled, and if you yourself must hear, bind your body fast to the mast. No matter how you plead, let no rope be loosed until the song is behind you. Then she told of Scylla and Charybdis. To one side, a cave where Scylla waits, 6 necks long and hungering, each maw armed with teeth enough to shred steel. To the other, Charybdis, a whirlpool that thrice a day swallows sea and ship alike, then spews it forth. Sail too near her and all will be lost. Better, cruel as it is, to pass Scylla's cave, and let 6 be taken than to lose all. The men shuddered, fear flickering in their eyes like stormlight. To row between such terrors was to choose death, only deciding whose. Odysseus's jaw tightened, but his gaze did not falter. Then Scylla it must be, he said quietly, though each word cost him blood. Circe's face softened. Even in choosing, your burden is heavy. Yet courage is not the absence of grief. It is the carrying of it forward. She laid her hand upon his, not as a lover, nor as a goddess, but as one who sees the weight another bears and honors it. That night they rested, but rest was uneasy. Men dreamed of jaws snapping from the dark, of waters that pulled like hands. Odysseus lay awake long, watching the rafters above. His thoughts wandered to Penelope, how she faced her own terrors without sword or sail, only wit and patience. He envied her strength, even as he longed to see her face. At dawn, Circe gave them provisions, bread baked in her hearth, meats smoked with herbs, skins of strong wine. To Odysseus she gave a final gift, a draught to steady the mind, brewed from roots grown only where sunlight meets shadow. When fear presses too close, drink, and remember who you are. They departed, the isle shrinking behind them, its smoke curling farewell. Circe stood upon the shore, her figure small against the sea, yet her voice carried upon the wind. Remember, Odysseus, endure, and you shall see home again. The men bent to the oars, and though terror waited ahead, their strokes fell with new strength, as if her words had placed iron in their spines. The prow turned toward the narrowing sea, toward voices that would beguile, toward mouths that would devour, toward a path only courage and cunning could hope to cross. The sea lay sleek as polished stone, and the sky was a great bright bowl turned over the world. Yet a thin tension plucked the men's nerves, the way a harp string hums just before the note. Somewhere ahead, unseen, voices waited. Voices Circe had said would unmake a man, not by tooth or claw, but by desire. Odysseus softened wax between his palms until it yielded like warm bread, then pressed it deep into every sailor's ears. He moved down the line himself, thumb to lobe, sealing sound away, and when he was done, the ship felt oddly farther from the world, as if they had slid beneath the skin of silence. Last of all, he bound himself to the mast, wrists, waist, chest, knots sure and neat, the kind a storm would respect. A wind rose from nowhere. The prow nosed into ripples like breath across a sleeping face. And then the singing began. No instrument could make such music. It came as if from under the water and above the sky at once. Tender, exact, intimate. It did not flatter. It knew. Odysseus, it said, not in a voice but in the shape of certainty. We sing what you long for most. We know the dust of Troy on your sandals, the names of the dead written on the back of your tongue. Come and learn why Achilles could not live gently, why kings fall to their kitchens, why gods love mortals who break. Come, be finished with not knowing he strained against the cords, muscles cutting his skin to welts, eyes stinging with the ache of it. He begged the men, though he knew they couldn't hear. Loose me. Just a little closer, they rode with faces calm as carved wood, deaf and obedient. He thrashed. They bound him tighter, hands practiced and impersonal. The song braided past and future, promised understanding not as a book, but as a touch on the back of the neck that says, "You are seen." Tears and salt tasted the same. He let his head fall, but his heart leaned still toward that shore littered with bones that once were ears. Then the song thinned. The sea's ordinary voice crept back, hiss, slap, breath. The spell unspooled behind them like a wake you cannot row back into. Wax came out, knots came off. Odysseus stood trembling, half ashamed, wholly grateful. He thanked his men not with speeches, but with water handed, a shoulder clasped, the work of a sail taken from tired hands. The island of voices shrank to a pale thought on the rim of the day. Before them the coastline rose in two black jaws. To starboard, a cliff honeycombed with caverns. To port, a throat in the water itself, where the sea gathered its skirts, spun and dropped, as if swallowing its reflection. The air smelled of iron and old storms. Circe's counsel returned. Steer closer to the rock, not the whirl. Lose a few, not all. Odysseus did not tell his men the whole of it. He stood at the prow and spoke the portion of truth that would let hands do their work. Row hard. Keep the bow kissing the right-hand cliff. Eyes down, no looking. He took up a spear, though he knew no spear could reach what waited. Leadership is sometimes the dignity of lying to yourself last. The strait narrowed. Spray struck like thrown pebbles. On the left, Charybdis drew breath. The sea pitched toward her, 1,000 streams rushing one way. On the right, something scraped stone, a sound like teeth across a plate. Then came Scylla. 6 necks lashing out of shadow, heads with eyes that saw want more than fear. They struck. 6 benches emptied in a blink. The cries were the cry of any man surprised by the last thing he will ever see, half question, half child. Odysseus swung and struck and shouted, as if sound alone could alter what the gods had measured. Blood patterned the water like red lace. The ship leapt forward on the strength of those it had just lost. Then, clear water, wide air, a wind that did not moan. The men kept rowing because to stop would mean hearing. He counted the empty places and did not speak their names aloud. Later, when night put a lid on the sky, he murmured them into the dark, one by one, and the sea kept the confidence. The next island rose in gold, meadows swaying, the smell of sweet grass and warm animal. Even before the keel kissed sand, the men heard the soft clapper of hooves, the lowing like a hymn. Helios' herd, sleek backs the color of wheat at noon, horns bright as crescents. Prohibition has a perfume, and hunger breathes it deeper than most. Not here, Odysseus said. Not these. We eat our stores, or we eat our oaths. Choose, the men agreed, as men do when their bellies are not yet demanding argument. But storms came. Long, hard, without pattern or pity. Days stacked on days, the wind pinned their ship to the shore as a child pins a beetle. The stores thinned to suggestions. Leather straps looked suddenly like food if you squinted. Odysseus kept watch, fasting, praying, walking the shoreline with a mind like wire. One afternoon, fatigue closed his eyes without asking permission. While he slept, Eurylochus spoke quietly, like a man negotiating with his own reflection. Better to owe Helios than our bones. We'll build altars when we're home. We'll pay with hecatombs. A god can wait. Hunger does not. Men nodded, because nodding is easier than endurance. They chose the fattest of the sacred herd. A blade whispered. Smoke rose, and the smell of roasting meat was a betrayal so delicious no one could stand upright under it. The sky brightened unnaturally, the way a smile can be too wide. The hides crawled, the severed hooves stamped. The meat sang in the pan with voices not its own. When Odysseus woke to the smell he had forbidden, fury found him and found no purchase. The deed was done, and the god already watching. The first calm day saw them out upon open water. The second saw the sky close like a fist. Zeus's bolt broke the mast as if swatting a fly. The hull split. The sea climbed aboard. Men went over the side as cleanly as seeds shaken from a pot. Odysseus lashed a spar and a plank and made of them a single stubborn thing. Alone, he rode the ruins of his choice and theirs. Thrinacia dwindled to a bruise on the horizon, and the world became wave, breath, wave. Days lost count of themselves. A current took him the way a story takes a listener, helpless, necessary. He learned the names of winds by their fingerprints on his skin. When at last a coastline unrolled, it did so with a softness so complete, he thought at first he was being tricked by mercy. Ogygia wore green the way a singer wears silence. On purpose, beautifully. Vines looped from trees like lazy handwriting, springs stitched the earth with silver thread. A cave opened in the flank of a hill, and from it came the smell of cedar smoke and baking bread. Calypso found him on the sand, salt-crusted, more noun than man. She did not ask who he was, because she knew the shape of shipwrecked men the way the sea knows the moon. She brought him within, bathed him in water that remembered heat kindly, laid food where his hands could reach it without asking. And when he slept, she watched over him, and the way an island watches over the boats that have chosen to trust it. Days made a habit of him. He healed into the life she offered, not a net, but a hammock, swaying, soft. Calypso sang while she wove. Her voice did not promise knowledge like the Sirens' song. It promised rest. She loved him with a love that did not need an oath. Stay, she said, once the color had returned to his face. Be the man who is finished with storms. I will make you more than mortal. No winter, no ache. I have time enough for us both. He walked her garden paths and felt the astonishing relief of not listening for the wind's spite. He lay beside her and learned the grammar of a gentleness that does not ask for proof. But each afternoon, when the sun tipped, he drifted to the shoreline and sat on a rock that remembered other men. He watched the seam of sky and sea, that old needle he could not stop following. Tears salted his knees without drama. Calypso saw and did not speak of it. Love can be that too. The tact of not putting names to wounds that must close on their own. 7 years is a kind of eternity if you measure by comfort. It is an instant if you measure by longing. The gods, who measure by neither, took counsel. Athena, who always had a weakness for men who used their minds like torches, argued for him. Hermes, who could cross any threshold, carried the verdict down. He arrived as a gust beneath gold sandals, a brightness at the cave mouth. Calypso's smile was rueful before he even spoke. "He is not mine to keep," she said, saving Hermes the work of words. Still, when she turned to Odysseus to tell him, she did not do it as a jailer unlocking a door. She did it as a host who has seen her guest stand up from a long rest and knows the road is tapping his heel. They built him a raft together. Straight trunks, sure lashings, a mast that would favor a man who understood leverage. She provisioned him as if spoiling a son for a journey he had insisted on. On the morning of leaving, she walked with him to the edge, where foam writes the water's diary. "I do not curse you for going," she said. "That would be to curse the shape of your name. I bless the wind you have chosen, even if it carries you away from me." He stepped aboard and did not look back until he was far enough that looking back would not harm him. Calypso's figure shrank to a candle, then to a star, then to an ache he folded carefully and placed where he kept the other precious pains. The sea, patient as a teacher, raised up a handsome swell and asked its first question of him. He answered with the tilt of his hand on the rudder, with the respectful set of his sail. Somewhere ahead lay Scheria, and beyond that the island he had been naming each night like a prayer. An island of rocks and goats and a bed rooted in an olive tree that had decided to become furniture rather than wood. He smiled without showing teeth. A man can love many havens, but he can only go home to one. For days the raft creaked beneath him, a fragile bone adrift on an ocean vast enough to swallow whole armies. Poseidon had not yet forgiven. Storms clawed at him, waves spun him like a toy, and more than once the sea pressed him beneath until blackness crowded his vision. But each time he rose again, coughing foam, eyes burning, hands clutching broken spars. Survival itself became a rhythm. Hold breath, rise, cling, endure. At last, half drowned and stripped of strength, he sighted land. Scheria, island of the Phaeacians. Its shores curved gentle as a cupped hand, woods feathering the hills, rivers threading silver to the sea. With the last shreds of his will, Odysseus dragged himself onto the sand, the surf hissing around his ankles like applause for a battle won. He collapsed among reeds and drifted into the sleep of the nearly dead, where dreams and waves sound the same. Dawn brought voices, clear, youthful, unafraid. Nausicaa, daughter of King Alcinous, had come with her maidens to wash garments in the river's shallows. Their laughter rang like bells, scattering seabirds into the sky. One toss of a ball carried too far startled Odysseus awake. He rose slowly from the reeds. Naked save for seaweed clutched around his loins, salt stiff in his hair. The maidens shrieked and fled like startled deer, all but Nausicaa, who stood firm, her eyes wide, not with fear, but with curiosity touched by wonder. Odysseus, though worn to bone, bowed low and spoke with the careful courtesy of a man who knows the power of words when swords are useless. "Princess," he said, "I am no threat. The sea has unmade me, but I am still a man who remembers honor. Grant me only cloth for modesty, water for thirst, and the road to your city." Nausicaa, moved, answered with grace. She bade her maids return, gave him garments fine and clean, and guided him to the city of her father. "Do not fear," she told him, "for my people love the stranger who comes weary. My father's halls are open as the sea itself. In Alcinous's palace, Odysseus found splendor. Walls gleaming with bronze, tapestries alive with woven scenes of gods and heroes, fountains spilling clear water into pools where fish darted like fragments of light. The king and queen received him with courtesy, and at the feasting table he was given meat, bread, and wine sweeter than any he had tasted since leaving Ithaca. Yet when the bard Demodocus sang of the war at Troy, the wooden horse, the city in flames, the cries of women carried into slavery, Odysseus bowed his head and wept. Tears fell upon his hands until all saw and marveled. At last the king pressed him gently. "Stranger, your grief is deep. Tell us your name, that we may honor it, and your story, that we may understand it." So Odysseus spoke, and his tale unfurled like a sail-catching wind. He told of Troy, of the Cyclops and the curse of Poseidon, of Circe and her enchantments, of the shades of the dead and the prophecy of Tiresias, of the Sirens' song that nearly tore his soul from his body, of Scylla's 6 jaws and Charybdis' maw, of the slaughter of Helios's cattle and Zeus's thunderbolt, of Calypso's long embrace. He told of every sorrow, every loss, every flicker of hope that had carried him across endless waters. The Phaeacians sat rapt, their faces lit by the fire of his words. Even Nausicaa leaned forward, her eyes shining, as if the man before her was not only a stranger, but a figure drawn from legend. When Odysseus's voice fell silent at last, the whole echoed with stillness, heavy with the weight of his suffering. Alcinous rose. "Odysseus of Ithaca, man of many trials, you shall wander no more. We will bear you home, across any sea against any storm. My ships are swift, my oarsmen tireless. Rest now, and tomorrow your voyage ends." Tears filled Odysseus's eyes again, but this time they burned with joy. For the first time in 20 years, the word home was not a wound, but a promise. The Phaeacian ship cut through the sea as if the waves themselves bent aside to let it pass. Its prow was sharp, its timbers golden, its oarsmen steady in rhythm that seemed less like labor and more like song. Odysseus lay upon soft blankets, lulled not by exhaustion alone, but by the certainty, fragile and dazzling, that this time the voyage would end where it should. His eyes closed, dreams carried him gently, as if the sea itself at last pitied its long-tormented son. When he woke, the ship was gone, and he lay upon familiar earth. Pebbles he had once kicked as a boy pressed against his palms. The air smelled of olives and salt, of goat's wool drying in the sun, of home. He sat up slowly, scanning the land. Rugged hills rising like old friends, fig trees nodding their branches, the sea stretching wide behind him. And yet Ithaca seemed strange, veiled in mist. Then she appeared. Athena, gray-eyed, radiant, in the guise of a shepherd. She smiled as only the immortal can, half mystery, half mischief. "So, Odysseus," she said, "the land beneath your feet is your own, though you do not yet know it. Long has it yearned for you as you for it. But beware, your hall is filled with men who eat your bread, drink your wine, and press your queen to choose among them. Your son walks in danger, for they plot against his life. Return not in haste, but in cunning, for cunning is the weapon the gods gave you." She touched him with her wand, and his form withered into that of an old beggar, skin sagging, beard ragged, clothes torn. Even his eyes dulled, though within them still burned the fire of kings. Odysseus accepted the disguise, for pride would not win this battle, only patience. He went first to the hut of Eumaeus, the swineherd. Smoke curled from its chimney, pigs grunted in pens. Eumaeus himself, broad-shouldered and weathered, greeted the beggar with kindness. "Come, stranger," he said. "Though I have little, what I have I share. Sit by the fire, warm your hands, taste bread and meat." Odysseus's heart swelled. Though years had passed, though his master had vanished, Eumaeus remained faithful, living humbly yet loyally. As he ate, he listened to the swineherd speak of Ithaca, of Penelope's endless weaving and unweaving, of the suitors feasting and plotting, of Telemachus grown to manhood but beset by danger. Every word was a knife, yet every word also stitched the fabric of his homecoming tighter. That night, Odysseus slept on a pallet of straw, and the simple warmth of loyalty wrapped him more securely than any blanket of kings. Meanwhile, Athena whispered across the sea to Telemachus, urging him home from his own search for news of his father. And so, by the weaving of fate, father and son came together in Eumaeus's hut. At first, Telemachus saw only a beggar, worn and lowly. But when Athena brushed away the disguise for a moment, revealing the king within, father and son embraced with tears and laughter mingled, the years of absence collapsing into a heartbeat. Odysseus held him fiercely, smelling the salt of his son's hair, feeling the strength in arms that had grown without him. "You are a man now," he whispered. Telemachus pressed his forehead to his father's. "And you are not only a memory," he answered. Together they spoke in hushed voices through the night, plotting. The suitors were many, loud and arrogant, but arrogance breeds blindness. They would not see until it was too late. Odysseus's heart beat with fierce joy, not for slaughter, but for justice. His hall would be cleansed, his wife freed from torment, his name restored. Dawn broke upon Ithaca, and the first light touched not only the hills and the sea, but the hearts of those who had waited too long. The storm of vengeance had begun to gather, silent and sure as thunder before the strike. The halls of Ithaca, once filled with the quiet order of Penelope's weaving and the laughter of servants, now rang with the clamor of men who did not belong. The suitors sprawled upon couches, their hands greasy with Odysseus's meats, their cups brimming with his wine, their voices rising in mockery. They tossed dice, quarreled over portions, boasted of how Penelope would soon be forced to choose among them. Yet she, wise as ever, delayed them, weaving by day and unweaving by night, her patience a fortress against their greed. But time had stretched long. Telemachus, grown to manhood, stood at her side. Yet his strength was not enough to cast out the horde. They mocked him too, calling him boy, calling him heir to nothing. And so Penelope conceived one last trial. From the storeroom, she brought Odysseus's great bow, a weapon none but he had ever strung. Smooth and polished, carved with symbols of hunts long past, it gleamed like a memory of thunder. "Here is my contest," she declared, her voice carrying above the rabble. I will wed the man who can string this bow and send an arrow through 12 axes set in line." The suitors jeered, confident. One by one they tried. Antinous first, boldest of all, braced the bow against his thigh, strained, cursed, sweat beading his brow. But the bow bent no more than if it were hewn of stone. Others followed, Eurymachus, Leiades, each with pride that withered into shame as the weapon mocked their weakness. Hours passed, the hall filled with the sound of men failing, and still the bow stood unyielding. In a corner sat a beggar, hunched and silent, eyes sharp beneath ragged brows. Odysseus watched, heart steady as arrogance bloomed into frustration. At last he spoke, voice rough but calm. "Let me try." Laughter exploded. "The beggar? Let this scarecrow strain and snap his back." Antinous sneered. Yet Penelope, her gaze unreadable, nodded. "Let him try." The bow knows its master Telemachus, his eyes bright with secret fire, brought the bow to the beggar. Odysseus took it in hands that trembled not with weakness, but with memory. He felt the weight, the curve, the hum of it, as if greeting an old friend after years apart. He set it easily, stringing it with one smooth motion, and in that moment the hall grew silent as death. He fitted an arrow, drew, and loosed. The shaft sang as it flew, piercing clean through all 12 axe heads, thudding into the far wall with a sound like destiny closing a door. Then Odysseus cast off his rags, standing tall and terrible, eyes blazing. "I am Odysseus," he cried, "king of Ithaca, returned." Before the suitors could move, he sent another arrow. It struck Antinous in the throat as he lifted his cup, wine spilling red as blood. Chaos erupted. The suitors scrambled for arms, but none were at hand. They had grown soft in their feasting, blind in their pride. Odysseus stood like a storm given flesh, arrows flying swift and sure. Telemachus, Eumaeus the swineherd, and the loyal cowherd joined him, spears in hand, courage blazing. The hall became a battlefield, but this battle was justice, not conquest. One by one the suitors fell, their cries echoing against stone. Some begged, some cursed, but Odysseus's face was iron. For years they had devoured his house, tormented his wife, plotted his son's death. Mercy was a word this moment did not know. When the last body lay still, silence flooded the hall. Broken cups gleamed among the dead, overturned tables bore witness to the end of arrogance. Odysseus stood panting, his bow lowered, his heart thundering not with triumph, but with release. Justice had been done. Yet one trial remained. Penelope descended, her face pale, her eyes searching. She had heard tales of gods sending phantoms, of trickery and false shapes. Could this truly be her husband after 20 years? Or was it a deception? She tested him with words, speaking of their marriage bed. "It can be moved," she said lightly. Odysseus's face darkened. "No man can move that bed. I carved it myself from the trunk of a living olive tree, built our chamber around it. Only a fool would say it could be shifted." At this, Penelope's composure broke. Tears rushed, her arms opened, and she ran to him, crying his name. They embraced at last, grief and longing dissolving into joy. Husband and wife, sundered by time and trial, were whole again. Telemachus watched, his heart swelling. For in that embrace was not only love restored, but a kingdom reborn. The hearth of Ithaca blazed once more, cleansed of shame. Outside, dawn lit the sky. The olive trees whispered in the breeze. The gods, watching from their high thrones, at last allowed peace. And Odysseus, man of many turns, weary of war, of wandering, of loss, had found again the only harbor that mattered, home. And so Odysseus, after storms, sorrows, and trials beyond imagining, at last found his way home. To the arms of Penelope, to the halls of Ithaca, to the peace he had dreamed of for 20 years. His tale reminds us all that no matter how far we wander, there is always a harbor waiting. Thank you for joining me on this long journey. I would love to hear from you. Where in the world are you listening from? And what story, legend, or myth would you like me to bring to life next? If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and share it with others who love timeless tales. Until the next journey, may your seas be calm and your homecoming sweet.